Yes, sir. I said, well, don't show it to me. He was about to show it to me. He said, because I want to talk about it.
Making the same mistake that Saddam made a decade ago, Gaddafi gave the banksters the excuse they were looking for. He told them to take their dollars and shove them where the sun doesn't shine. He announced that he would no longer accept dollars or even euros as payment for his country's oil. He wanted real gold. He wanted dinars in exchange for the black gold that he had. And with that, Gaddafi sealed his own fate. On February 23rd, special forces from 3 NATO nations arrived in Libya, France, Britain, and the United States. They began to arm and train these rebels that were based in Benghazi. Advanced forces from the Gulf Cooperation Council, consisting mainly of Qatari soldiers, set up shop in the Nafusa Mountains, Benghazi, and eventually Tripoli to train the rebels. But just who are these rebels? Well, they come from eastern Libya. That's where the revolution began, and it's been a hotbed for al-Qaeda terrorists for years. Many of the terrorists from that region went abroad to wage jihad against the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan, only to come home to Libya to be jailed by Gaddafi for belonging to the LIGF, the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, a terrorist group that Gaddafi had put down years earlier. At least he thought he had put them down. I guess he was mistaken. That's right, you heard me correctly. Muammar Gaddafi, the man that we've been told was a terrorist, all of these years was also an active partner in the war on terror. His jails were filled with al-Qaeda terrorists, including these 2 men, Abdul Hakim Belhaj and Abdel Hakim al-Asidi. Al-Asidi was captured near Peshawar, Pakistan, where he was fighting coalition forces. After his capture, he was turned over to the U.S., where he spent time as a guest of the CIA before being turned over to the Libyans to rot in their jails for a while. Now, Belhaj is a little bit different. He's an old-school jihadist, a real OG. He fought alongside Osama bin Laden, along with scores of other fighters from the LIFG during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. And that's how far back his al-Qaeda ties go. He was also captured and held for a time in a secret prison, a special CIA prison in Malaysia, before he was sent to Libya to languish there as well. Belhaj and al-Asidi were freed earlier this year, along with 240 other Islamic militants, at the exact same time that foreign intelligence operatives were landing in eastern Libya by Muammar Gaddafi's son Saif in an attempt at reconciliation.
Among them are leaders of the al-Qaeda-linked Libyan Islamic Fighting Group. In total, 214 prisoners linked to militant groups were set free, in a key milestone for Libya's program of reconciliation with militants who killed dozens of soldiers and police in the 1990s.
So now that the commanders have been placed in the field, all they need are troops. Where better than to find a bunch of scumbag terrorists than a prison?
Well, remember this from Wednesday? Anti-Gaddafi rebels freed a prison in Tripoli. Today, CNN has learned that among those liberated, inmates are hundreds of men who are believed to be supporters of al-Qaeda. They're now on the loose.
By now, the revolution was picking up steam, with a literal army of al-Qaeda terrorists and supporters on the ground. However, the Libyan leader was successfully dealing with the uprising and was pushing the rebels back until March 19th, when NATO, in response to mainstream media allegations of atrocities being committed by the Gaddafi regime, began raining cruise missiles and laser-guided bombs down on the country. In the video we're watching now, a NATO cluster bomb munition hits an area densely populated by civilians. Cluster bombs near civilians? Really? What in the hell were you guys thinking? Whatever happened to precision munitions? Well, we'll get back to the tactics in this war in just a minute. Right now, I'd like to point out an oddity. What do you suppose would be a major priority for an insurgent force that's trying to overthrow a government? Securing weapons, maybe. Planning strategy. pushing the fight forward? That's what I'd do. What would you say if I told you that one of the first things that these rebels did before NATO started helping them was to open up a central bank? That's right. The very same day that NATO got involved, and long before any victory was assured, these CIA and MI6 trained Al-Qaeda rebels opened up a central bank and a new national oil company. The supposed ragtag revolutionaries announced the formation of the Libyan Oil Company as supervisory authority on oil production and policies in the country, based temporarily in Benghazi, and the appointment of an interim director general of the company. The council also said it designated the Central Bank of Benghazi as a monetary authority competent in monetary policies in Libya, and the appointment of a governor to the Central Bank of Libya, with a temporary headquarters in Benghazi. Writing for the website economicpolicyjournal.com, economist Robert Wenzel stated, "Here's one for the Guinness Book of World Records. This suggests that we're having a bit more than a ragtag bunch of rebels running around, and that they have some pretty sophisticated influences. I have never before heard of a central bank being created in just a matter of weeks out of a popular uprising. This continues to look like a major oil and money play, with the true disaffected rebels being used as puppets and cover as the oil money and transfers take place." Now, by late June, the rebels were pushing down from the Nafusa Mountains to towns in the foothills, which was allowing them to gain control of the strategically important roadways that linked Tripoli with Tunisia, which was Gaddafi's main source of supplies. It's important to note here that those bases in the Nafusa Mountains were the staging area for the Qatari troops, who were part of the GCC contingent based out of Doha, along with troops from the United Arab Emirates. They had been training there alongside Al-Qaeda terrorists for months, with Qatari weapons brought in on fishing boats.
We believe France still supplies weapons to the rebels, and today the Libyan rebels whom we captured in these two boats admitted that the whole operation was carried out with the coordination between them, the Qatari army, and NATO ships in the Mediterranean Sea.
After several more months of NATO bombardment, Gaddafi's forces were surrounded by rebel forces and getting pounded from the air every time they tried to make a move. Finally, on October 20th, an 80-vehicle convoy carrying Muammar Gaddafi attempted to escape the city of Sirte, where he'd been holed up. They broke through the inner cordon of Al-Qaeda and Qatari troops, but before they could get away, the convoy was attacked by French fighter planes and a Predator drone that was being flown from Las Vegas, Nevada.
What we can certainly say to you is we didn't target the convoy believing Gaddafi was in it. There was a convoy of vehicles, military vehicles, maneuvering in the vicinity of Sirte, heading in a particular direction, with armed to the teeth, which was engaged by NATO aircraft yesterday. Okay, yesterday, 08:30 local time. Convoy one, there was a strike. Convoy was disrupted. A number of the vehicles heading off in a different direction. That was then struck again. It was disrupted. We then, obviously, at some delay, see the events that unfolded on the TV screens.
The whole world watched as the videos poured onto the internet. We watched as Muammar Gaddafi was dragged out of a drainage culvert. We watched as he was beaten. We watched as he was abused and even sodomized by his captors. He was paraded around on the hood of a truck like a 10-point buck on the last day of hunting season. He was dragged through the streets and beaten some more, and then he was murdered. I was watching one of the videos of Gaddafi's capture, where I saw a user had made mention of the fact that the rebels that surrounded Gaddafi, the ones that were ripping a now defenseless 70-year-old man to shreds, were wearing the uniforms of the Qatari army, whose camouflage pattern is distinct from the patterns of the other countries in the Middle East. I wondered what the hell Qatari troops were doing there in the first place. I thought this was a NATO operation. So what were GCC troops doing involved? I was curious to see if those really were Qatari troops, so I forwarded the video to a couple of people I know that live in the Middle East. They confirmed that the men were in fact wearing Qatari uniforms. That can be explained, I suppose, by the 18 plane loads worth of supplies that the Qataris had flown into the rebels. But the fact that they were speaking Arabic with a Qatari accent is a bit harder to reconcile with the fact that they were really rebels. So now I'll tie it all together. The U.S. Central Command is located in Doha, Qatar. That alone should speak volumes. After he was released from prison by Saif Gaddafi, guess who turned up at the Doha Libyan Contact Group as one of the participants who was to help chart Libya's future? If you guessed old school AQ terrorist Abdul Belhaj, close associate of Iraqi al-Qaeda leader Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, and a former guest of the CIA, then you have guessed correctly. Ding, ding, ding. He and his buddy Abdel Hakim al-Hasidi are now ranking members of the new Libyan National Transitional Council. That's right, the CIA is responsible for putting the worst possible scum in the world in charge of Libya. I can say that they are the worst possible scum with conviction, because I've seen the aftermath of their campaign of terror as they ravaged the Libyan landscape, and now you will too. If you have a weak stomach, then turn off the video. If you have children in the room, tell them to leave, because what's coming up next is disturbing. As they went terror-assing around Libya, these rebels have waged a brutal, racist campaign of genocide against black Libyans and black guest workers from other African countries. Not even light-skinned Libyans who have sheltered their black friends and neighbors are free from reprisals. The signature al-Qaeda beheading is usually the price they pay for being black.
Don't forget to go to the blog at bobpowell.blogspot.com and subscribe there too. And on Google Plus, add me to your circle so that when I have an update, you'll be first to know what's new at The Truth is Viral. And while you're there at the blog, if you have the financial ability, please donate to the cause, because everything that I do is paid for by you. I can't afford to do any of this stuff on my disability alone. It's $600 a month, and it's barely enough to live on. So if I do